Creality sent out one of their latest printers, the Ender 3 Max Neo. Comes in a nice cardboard box as you're used to, has some couple images of the printer on the outside, and some foam on the inside, of course. The printer does require a little bit of assembly, but these days it's nothing to write home about. Just a couple of screws and some plugs that need to be plugged in, and then you can simply just put in the PLA or whatever plastic you want to run through it. In this case, it came with a white, and also they sent out some of their navy blue. So like I said, when it comes to assembly, it is mainly two big pieces and a couple of screws for some of these smaller accessories like the screen that needs to be attached to it. Plug in some of the plugs and wires, remove some of the plastic, and you're ready to go. After about 10 minutes of screwing all of the screws and plugging all of the plugs, it was ready to go, and I powered it up and started leveling it. Now it does have one of these leveling probes, so without reading the instructions, to be very honest, I simply just pressed the auto level and let the machine do its work, figuring that would be how this should work. Turns out it's not, but then again, we'll figure that out later. Also, the screen is not a touchscreen, so the knob has to be used. There are some pre-configured files on the SD card that is included with the printer, so simply just choose one and press go. Now, as I've said, I did not read the instructions, which I should have, and simply just press the auto level in the menu and then let the machine heat up after it did the auto leveling cycle and start the first print. Now that was obviously, in a couple of seconds, it's going to be very obvious, the wrong way to go through it. I needed to actually level the machine by hand first, as this is not a fully automated leveling system, but just a partially automated leveling system, I guess, as I did not move the Z offset at all, and therefore it was way too high. Now, that could have easily been solved if I just followed the instructions like I said, but I didn't. So my advice with this printer, if you take it out of the box, do follow the instructions, actually open the booklet and read it a little bit, and save yourself from a couple of really weird faces looking at this thinking, what the hell did I actually do wrong? Now, I did not even touch the screws on the underside of the bed to raise it up a little bit. That would solve it just a little bit, but that is not the actual solution. If you go through the instructions and follow it all the way, you need to raise the bed, give the springs a little bit of room, then go through that leveling, do it manually, and then the automated version as well, and finally also set the Z offset. Now I'm just explaining this really simply, but if you follow the instructions in the booklet that comes with it, it will all make sense. Just follow it very clearly. As I said, follow it clearly. I again did not. I missed the final step, and that is adjusting the Z offset. Now in this case it is set to -2.55. That is just the number that I had. If you have your bed lower or higher, that number will change, and you can play around with it. So after doing everything correctly and actually reading and following all of those steps, I went off to print the first test file that is on there. It is labeled as boat, but in the 3D printing world, this is more commonly known as a benchy. This is just one of those calibrating testing files just to put the printer through its paces and see what it can do. If that turns out good, you're good to go and move on to actually printing what you want to do. Now, since I'm testing this printer and want to see what it can do, I printed some not too wide, not too deep, but higher files, as well as this vase, seeing if it can capture all of the details, and also trying some other parts. Like you can see here, this is one of those book stands that just takes up a lot more space on the print bed itself. Now, of course, that's not the only test files that I did, but I will get to those later on. Just looking at the printer print is pretty mesmerizing, but probably not what you're here for. So just to go over a couple of the details on the printer itself, it has these leveling springs underneath just to stop the bed from wobbling all that much and keep a bit of tension on it. Some nice knobs to turn it up and down and help you level it really easily. Turns nice and smooth. Don't make them too loose, as that will stop them from staying in their position. Do keep them a little bit tight and simply just follow along with all of the instructions for the leveling. The bed itself is nice and sturdy as well. The bearings along it are nicely tightened. Sometimes they need a little bit of extra work, but in this case they were all ready to go straight out of the box, except the one around the actual extruder that did need a little bit of tightening, but not too much. It's just a general rule of thumb to go over them all before you start printing. Sometimes they can be a little bit loose. Something I'm seeing coming up a lot more with these printers is that there is actually a nice small drawer underneath to store all of the tools that come with it and just keep it all together nicely. Some of the belt tensioners are in this case nice and red. It gives a bit of a nice detail to the printer. Doesn't change anything apart from the color. They do work nicely. The belts were already tensioned fairly good, so they didn't really need all that much adjustment. Same for all of the screws. Nothing really needed to be tightened up along all of the motors and all of the other stuff all around, which I'm not really sure what I'm doing here. But then again, both motors on both sides, which is a good thing. Not all of these printers come with two motors. Sometimes they come with one, but then again, the leveling is a bit harder. And in this case, it comes with two. There is also a holder on the side for your filaments. It is not too sturdy. It is made out of plastic, really lightweight, and can wobble around a bit. But if you put it in the correct position, it shouldn't really be all that much of a problem. This one is made out of metal right here as well. Nice and sturdy, pulls the filament through strong enough. There is also a filament runout detection sensor. It can be a bit of an hassle putting the filament through. Just jam it in and it works perfectly well. Now, as I've said before, there is a touch probe on this one as well to level out the bed. Doesn't really work as I thought it would work, or it could work. It works really nicely, but it does require a bit of manual leveling. The glass print bed on this one is made out of glass. Not my favorite material, as it tends to not keep the prints on there very tightly. This one did heat up nice and evenly. You can see a bit of residue on it, but you can't feel it. But I had some prints that were bigger and did warp a little bit. So I would suggest to use some glue with these print beds. It does leave a nice smooth finish on the underside of the print, but in my experience it doesn't hold on to the print all that well, specifically the bigger, flatter prints. Now the screen that is attached to the side here is not a touch screen. That does bring the cost down a little bit more. The resolution on the screen is very nice and high quality. It works really well with the knob. Is a really fast and responsive screen in this case, and it works really well. It has a matte finish on it as well, so that gives you a nice clear visibility, and the lighting from behind doesn't really interfere with it all that much. It also goes into a bit of a sleep and awake mode. If you don't touch it at all, it will dim down a little bit, and once you then turn the knob to change some things or check some things, it will light up a little bit brighter. And as you can see, it doesn't really reflect all that well, which is again good for visibility on the screen itself. With the printer now taken care of, these are all of the files that are printed on it. Some bigger ones, some smaller ones, and of course the ones that are included on the SD card that you get with the printer as well. The first one is a Benchy, a nice calibration test print to see how clean the printer works and if it is good to go. If there are any major flaws in this, you will probably need to adjust some things on the printer itself, but in this case, pretty much straight out of the box and after correctly leveling it, everything went perfectly fine. The layer lines are mostly nice and even, stacking up fairly well as it should, and all of the smaller detail pieces around the door opening, the windows, the smaller smokestack on top, and all of the other layering is really nice. There are some minor imperfections, but they are really, really minor. There's no major wobbling to be seen in the prints themselves, and overall the quality is really well, as you should probably expect from one of these Creality printers. Same goes for the next file. That was the Rabbit, also included on the SD card. I did not do anything slicing wise to this one. It was pre-configured and just set up ready to go. On the underside, this is the texture that the glass build plate leaves, nice and smooth, and has a bit of a nice detail on it as well. The general layer lines on this one are also very, very smooth. Nothing really to complain about, and just ready to move on to the actual prints that you want to do with the printer, but it's always good to have these all tested and seeing if it functions the way it should. The next one is one that I printed or sliced myself with the Cura slicer, setting up the printer, and I wanted to test this one specifically for the height of the printer and to see how the layer lines would stack up. On the inside it is not really as smooth on all of the sides, or at least on one of the sides. The other sides are nice and smooth and stack up pretty well. It is a fairly high print. I think it's about 20 centimeters in this case, with a lot of detail in there. It does have a little tiny bit of stringing here and there, but that is easily removed and nothing to write home about or even really mention, as most printers would have this effect, and it's just overall a really nice quality print. Next up is one of the prints that filled up the build plate a bit more. It's not really a high print, just more of a wider, flatter print to see what the print would look like if you'd fill up the actual build plate. And not only that, with this bigger print it has a nice big area on the top surface to see how the final surface quality is as well for that finishing layer. Now this is probably down to a bit more of the slicing than it is to the printer itself. So even though there is a little bit of an uneven surface here and there, that is again due to the slicing from the printer hopping from one side to the next and not continually filling that top surface in one go, but doing a little bit in the left corner right here, and then doing a little bit on the right corner down there, and then going back to the left one and down to the right one. But in general, for the printer itself, the quality of this top surface is really nice, and this one stuck down to the build plate really well and flat too. So the filaments that I've been testing and using on this one, the white one and the blue one are from Creality, and this red one and the gray one are from Airbrush 3D. They have supplied me with a lot of different colors and a couple different types of filament to use for these printer tests, and I will be leaving some links and discount codes if they have them down in the description below. So this print again is a bit bigger, filling up the print bed, and also a bit higher to see if it is capable of doing both of these tasks at the same time and doing it just as well. Now there is a little bit of over extrusion on some of these smaller details, but that could probably be down to some of the settings, and that is more my fault than the printer's. A lot of these finer details on the door sort of side is a lot better and doesn't really show all that much imperfections. The overhang is done really nicely, not a lot of drooping. You could add some supports, but to test the printer out I removed those. The inside finish on some of the sections is better than others. Not really sure what is happening there. Could be down to some of the speeds and other settings, thickness of the sidewalls and that kind of thing, but on one side right here it's not really that great. A bit of a rougher finish, but then on the other side it is nice and smooth, so I don't really have an explanation for it. Now, like I've spoken about at the beginning of the video, this one does have a glass print bed. I personally am not a fan at all. This bigger print, since it is a bit higher as well, it warped. Some of the corners let loose prematurely. The print did finish fine, but after probably having the bed cool down, these corners pulled up and therefore warped the print, which is a bit of a letdown, but probably with some glue and different support settings that could be fixed. And to finally finish it off, I wasn't really all that impressed with the speed of the printer, so I decided to play around with the settings. The settings that I imported were just some standard settings into Cura. They had it set at 60 millimeters a second, so I just bumped it up to 120, as this printer should be capable of doing it. Now, doing that, the left one is the fast one and the right one is the regular slower one. There is a bit of a quality difference. However, the speed and therefore the total printing time did change. Overall, these are fairly similar, but looking up closely, some of the sides are not really as nice and detailed, and specifically the top surface isn't really all that nice. As you can see, the x-axis is pretty similar. There is a little bit of a booger on the slower one, and the faster one doesn't have it, but that could just be down to this print. but overall the smoothness of the slower setting is a lot better, and some of the over extrusion on the slower one again is a little better as well. The bottom surface is pretty much identical, nice and smooth, no imperfections to show, and then the top surface on the slow one, which is on the right here, is a lot better than it is on the faster one. The rest of the settings are identical, so I only changed the speed, so that is a bit strange, but the general quality of the faster sped up print is a bit lower, so I figured this printer does a little better with the regular lower print settings. If you are interested in this printer and or these filaments, I will be leaving links in the description below, and I hope to see you guys next time.